Hey everyone. Today we're going to take a look at one of the other Mikawa Nagura. In the last video we looked at the Mikawa Botan Nagura, which is the first primary Nagura most people use when they're thinking of the Mikawa lineup. And today we're going to take a look at the next step after that, which is called the Tenjyo. For those of you familiar with other Japanese natural whetstones, you may find that there is a type of stone called a Tenjyo Suida. It comes from the Suida layer. Between the two Suida layers is a very deep layer and a more shallow layer, Strata. And the Tenjyo Suida comes from that more shallow Suida layer and is also the same layer that Uchikamori comes from. This is to not be confused with that stone. Though they both share the name Tenjyo, which means heaven or ceiling depending on the context in Japanese. This is not the same type of stone as that. They are from different geological seams, and they don't perform, comparably to one another. So when we're talking about the Mikawa Tenjyo, take it, it is a Mikawa Nagura. It functions as a late stage Nakatoishi around the 6K range. It shares the backstory of all the other Mikawa Nagura. It's from the eastern Aichi area of Japan, and it is, harkens back to a rich history, particularly related to the Koma variant of Mikawa Nagura being involved in sword sharpening, but the Mikawa Nagura lineup has been used for razor honing and knife polishing, knife sharpening, and other various purposes for a long time, and obviously even today it's still usable for those purposes. So as we already said, it is the second stone in the traditional Mikawa lineup. However, in the broader Mikawa lineup, it is the fifth stone, realistically speaking. So, if you're looking at the full spectrum, you'll find it's a little bit later in the Mikawa lineup spectrum, but if you're talking about the traditional four, usually that traditional four starts with Botan and then goes to Tenjyo, and we usually see it for razor polishing. That's usually why you would want a brick of it or a Nagura version of it. As discussed in other videos as well, you'll hear this brick referred to as a Nagura, and then you'll still hear this handheld version referred to as a Nagura. The material that they're both made of we would call Tenjyo Nagura, Mikawa Nagura. However, usually that term indicates something different. When the stone is named Tenjyo Nagura, it's referring to just the material of the stone being, good for correcting blades. Whereas this handheld version, exclusive of whether or not it's Tenjyo Nagura material, right? It could be Aizu. This is an Aizu Nagura, right? So in a way, this is a Tenjyo Nagura. We don't really refer to it that way, but that does help you wrap your head around it. It's just the word is used in two different ways. So I've covered that in other videos. If you've watched other Nagura videos, I apologize for the repeat information. So realistically, if you want to look up more about the Mikawa mine and all the history that goes along with that, and Asano and Iwasaki, all that information is out there in some of my other videos, and also covered at greater length by other web pages and YouTube videos. So that's out there for you to take a look at. The only other thing worthy of note is, similar to Botan, Tenjyo has two stratas, two layers within the Mikawa mountain, or with the mountain they use, within the Mikawa mine, that can be Tenjyo. And in Botan, we have that in Botan and Yei Botan. But at the end of the day, these are so similar that you call it Tenjyo whether it comes from one area or the other, whether it comes from one of the strata or the other. They both get referred to as Tenjyo. Unlike Botan, there's no differentiation between if it's one of those layers or another. They function so interchangeably that there's no difference made. So, as with other Mikawa Nagura, this is a little bit of a thirsty stone. Unlike my particular Botan piece we looked at, It's a little bit on the softer side. Mikawa Nagura still tend to be fairly dense, but this you'll see it just slurs a little easier. But it does definitely help with the process for it to be soaked. So I'm going to go ahead and get this soaking, probably wait about 5 minutes with it in the water, just sealed on the sides and the back. If you're ever going to soak your stones, I always suggest you seal on the sides and the back. And after that 5 minutes, we'll pull it back out, take a look at our sample blade here, so you know what we're dealing with before we begin the sharpening and polishing process, and then we'll get to the examples. So see you in just a bit. Alright, it's been 5 minutes and we're going to go ahead and pull out our handheld Nagura and then the bench Nagura here. Also, thinking about the previous section while the stone was soaking, I do know that you do not pronounce Yae Boten as Ye Boten, but I was not going to re-record the entire section just because of that one misspeak. So, for anybody thinking about leaving a comment for that, I apologize. So anyway, we've soaked it for 5 minutes now. It really is a beautiful stone, and this is probably, when used in just a standard bench stone format, if I had to pick one of the Mikawa Nagura is just a generalist stone, I tend to like this one the best, insofar as it just has a very wide range of uses, kind of like a superior to Shima in a certain way, whereas some of the other ones might be go a little under that, or don't cut as aggressively, or are really expensive. This one can often, hit the right variables to make it really worth using. So, before we jump into the actual stone, just give it a little bit more water here, because why not? I'm going to go ahead and show you the finish on the knife that we're already working with. Now, on the Botan video, which I actually think I'm pretty close to wanting to re-record that, mainly because I felt like I didn't pull up enough slurry from the stone. It burnished a little bit more than I feel like it should have, and also the finish on the knife was not shown very well in the video because I tried to do only the manual focus. So this time, let's go ahead and try to do the automatic focus, which takes a little bit of doing, this camera. But hopefully this time when I review this, you will have actually seen the finish that we're working with on the knife. So, I worked this up through Nakatoishi, through a soft Takashima Tomai stone, and finished on a harder Iwatani Tomai stone, and then also used just a little bit of finger stones to even out the surface. So if we look close, there are maybe a few rogue scratches, and down here at the tip we don't have the bevel completely perfect, same as down here, but I don't usually use this one for this purpose. Usually I use the little petty in all my other videos, but it's still in service, but I did bend it a little bit, and that means I have to redo everything. I had to reset all of the polish on it, so I didn't want to delay this video any longer, so I pulled out the Nakiri and just spruced up this side so we can go ahead and use it today. So alright, I'm hoping that has been a sufficient view of the current polish, and now we can get on to taking a look at what this stone does on its own. So we're going to go ahead and just get this so that you guys can see. And even after a 5-minute soak, which I did time this time, you can see that the stone still actually continues to suck up a bit of water. Some people will soak their stones 20 minutes, and that will go away if you were to do it in that amount of time. I just don't want to soak the stone for that long. It's not of any particular danger to the stone with it lacquered on the sides and back, but I think that after that first 5 minutes, while yeah, it's still a tiny bit thirsty, you don't find the performance disbenefit that you will find otherwise. But if you have a certain Tenjyo Nagura and you want to see how well it can perform if you push it to its limits, soak it for 20 minutes, soak it for an hour, soak it for 2 hours, and see the difference. It will soften up a little bit as you push that, but of course there are just diminishing returns. Alright, so we got this big handheld Nagura. Let's go ahead and make us some slurry here. This Nagura and this base stone are fairly well suited for one another. Sometimes they won't be the same hardness, or they won't perform exactly the same. I find these two are happy with one another, if you want to call it that. And even though the bottom stone here is a striped stone, and this is not, this is a pure white stone, this frequently slurry is white anyway. If I kicked it up with just like a diamond plate, you would see that it did that. So it's an interesting stone. It works well. So let's go ahead and see what we get here. So again, we're on the side that I showed you before. We got some slurry, not a huge amount, but just some to get us going. And let's see how we do. So you can see, it cuts pretty well. It's not a slouch in that department at all. And if you wanted it to be even faster, you could have kicked up, far more slurry than I did. Truth be told, I didn't really pull up that much. So I know it might make the videos take a little longer, but I do feel like in some older videos I could have spent just a little bit more time on the stone. Maybe we would have gotten a little bit better results. Sometimes, if you're like working on a stone, kind of like how if you use sandpaper on a surface, it'll show up fairly scratchy to begin with, and as you even out that surface with more and more scratches, it'll get a little bit finer looking as the surface normalizes, right? As you work it and the scratches all get to the same level and you flatten out that surface. So I don't think it's drastically changed any of the evaluations of stones. This is not the only time I use the stone. I use it many times before we get to the video front. The video is just, the one in-person example. So I don't think that any of the evaluations of the stones have been inaccurate, but I do feel like sometimes I'll look at the video and look at my own results and feel like, man, if I just maybe done one or two more passes, it would have looked a little more accurate or better or something. So let's see what we got. I still might want to do another pass. We can call it here. As always with these, if we did it a little longer, or a little more, or if this bevel was a little better done, we would be able to make it even more even. But I would say that this is good. It shows the characteristics of the stone that we're going for, and demonstrates how nice these can be. So let's go ahead and get this on screen here. Now, as with most of these Mikawa Nagura, it is not a scratchless finish, but it's a very nice finish with only a little bit of scratching on the core, and a little bit of scratching on the cladding, but those scratches are very shallow. And of course, if you were going to use this for polishing and you really wanted to go ham, you could go up to the next two steps, and you would refine those further. But realistically speaking, this level of polish that this is giving us is sufficient for us to move on to a shage toishi, a beginning, starting, finishing stone. It's just that term just identifies into finishing stone, but frequently we'll say that it's before an awaseido. So it's usually identifying like a 3 out of 5, 3.5 out of 5 suida or tomai, something that's soft, going to be a little bit coarser, but further we'll refine these scratches. Usually what that would do is erase all the scratches on our core and then leave just the finest scratches here that we can then work out with our harder awaseido. So it's a good stone, obviously. I hope that's evident. It's definitely above the Aizu level, and I do think that it performs, again, that little tiny bit better than the Tsushima Nagura. I think the Tsushima Nagura in a staging practice, right, where you're going early Nako Toishi, late Nako Toishi, Shage Toishi, awaseido, I think the Tsushima still works for this step. But realistically speaking, if you were in a world where this was equally as expensive as a Tsushima, you would pick this. I think it just cuts a little faster, it wears a little slower. Obviously, it ends up being a bit finer of polish. But you do have a flip side that you don't live in a world where you can find those stones for the same price. I think the last time I checked, the Tsushima is about half the price of one of these for the same size block. So, if you want to track one down, they work really great. I think they're really enjoyable to use. They definitely have a place in polishing. We'll do a sharpening here in just a second. But, with the Tsushima Nagura around, if you're not really going for something really in particular, it's harder to justify this. Now, what I really enjoy using this for is actually, I do not really use it to polish all that often. I will use it with the botan and the other two steps for razor work. And I find that you really blow through the process and make fantastic edges using both the base and the Nagura together, rather than just the Nagura on a hard awaseido. So if you are doing a lot of razors, or you just like to do the razors, I think it can be valuable to track that down. I mean, these things nowadays are pretty expensive as is, so it might be worth it to just pony up and get one of the big ones. If you can find it, that tends to be the problem. They don't stick around on the market very often, but you can find them on Bai from Sakamoto's store, and you can find them on other various auction sites that pop up now and again. It might take you a couple months to find one based on the frequency of the listings, but you will if you really want. So let's go ahead and get this watered down again. Oh yeah, I think in the past it's been best to completely remove the old swarf. Mostly. That's good enough for our purposes here. And we'll go ahead and regenerate a brand new slurry. With these, you don't really need a whole lot of slurry. Generating the slurry actually makes the stone more thirsty. You're kind of taking off that top hydrated layer. So definitely, if you're going to be doing a lot of work and you want a lot of slurry, more than I'm making, you do maybe want to look at soaking it for longer so that you have a larger layer on the top that's hydrated. And as such, you can form more of that slurry without having it get real thirsty on you again. So let's go ahead and just see how this does. It's really difficult, I find, actually, to show sharpening tests. I mean, I guess I could dull this on a glass container or something, and then sharpen it back up, but you wouldn't jump to this step if you fully dulled it. You see people, cutting newspaper or paper standing up, You know, you can do the hanging hair test if you're starting to get close to razors. I don't find that any of them are super valuable because they can all be kind of gamed. I've had edges I'm happy with that aren't always able to pass all those tests. And then I've had edges that pass the tests and I'm unhappy with them. So I think it's just a little easier to show you what the feedback sounds like and give you my impression. You can take that for what it is. All right, let's go ahead and do this. So you can now get a better idea of the cutting power of the stone, because obviously that we were just on the hardened core steel, and it still does a very good job of cutting here. This is where you'll find when you sometimes go from the sharpening or the polishing test to the sharpening test, that some stones won't carry over their cutting speed as well, because, you know, they're really good at removing the material from the cladding, but they might not quite have the cutting power to really help you out on that core steel. This one is pretty good. Now, these stones, most of the Mikawa stones, are slower wearing, and what that ultimately means is that they will want to glass on the top or exhaust, whatever you want to call it. Usually you can identify this by looking at the surface of the stone and seeing if it's a little reflective or, right, glass-like. And these stones will kind of do that. Now, when you're using them, that can actually be valuable to you because the stone starts to, you know, act a bit more fine as you go through exhausting that top layer. What it does mean, though, is that you just have to be prepared to condition the surface of the stone a little bit more often. You can do that, of course, with the handheld Nagura, as we just did right now. That'll be slower to get rid of your conditioning. Or you could use a 140 grit, 400 grit, one of those two diamond plate, and we'll see, which we'll go ahead and do that now. You'll see if we use this to recondition the surface, which actually, maybe what's best here is for me to try to show you this might be hard, and I apologize if you can't see it, but the surface has like a sheen to it that shows the light going off of it. You can clear that up with, again, the handheld or the diamond plate, but the handheld, you know, it's only wearing away so little stone that you'll have to spend more time clearing it up. Or we can use this is an exhausted 140, 140, so it acts a bit more like an out-of-the-box 400 does. Not super fast, but it'll make pretty quick work of this. We still didn't, for how many laps we just did, that's still not a crazy amount of slurry that we got there, which is good, right? You don't want to be blowing through your stones if you can help it. But let's go ahead and see now how fast it cuts with that. Reasonably. I actually don't think we got a whole lot out of it with that 140. I mean, we got a little bit more slurry. Maybe we're getting a little bit more swarf out of this. But I actually think that we gained a fair amount from the handheld, comparatively. Just a little on-air test, I suppose, there. And it leaves a very nice edge here. you know, again, I don't know how many times I can say it, I suppose, but a bit above a Tsushima. But it's going to be below, it's going to be below a, I would argue it's going to be comparable to a 3 out of 5 Shage Toishi on the edge formation. On the polishing, it definitely is a little below that, just because you still have some scratches that remain visible. But on the edge formation, I think you could use them interchangeably and be happy. This is not a toothy edge, but it also doesn't feel like a sushi knife edge either. You know, there's a little bit of that bite that you're gonna want for if you're someone who likes bite in your blade for kitchen work. It has just enough to where I think, you know, if you like an Aizu, if you like a 3 to 5K finisher, this would just bump you up a little bit of that extra step, and they are very nice to work with. So that's what we have on the sharpening and polishing side of things. Now, I had at least one person contact me about the Boten video asking, you know, hey, you brought up using it for razors, when you're gonna, and you know, review it for razors. And I also know a lot of people have been waiting for Awasado or Shage Toishi videos, and they will come. And I will revisit all of these Mikawa Nagura for like a razor edition when the time comes. But what I want to get first is, you know, a nicer digital microscope that I can take some pictures for you guys with. So I could, you know, I could do the razor on the surface and you could hear how it sounds, but I want to kind of be able to show you, it, you know, as we progress through those different stages. And that way maybe I can use this on an Awasado, you know, with one razor that's finished a certain way, and then another razor that's finished the exact same way before we used this on an Awasado. I can then use it on this bench stone. You guys can get an idea of, you know, I guess what the difference is if you end up going the bench stone, you know, Tenjyo Nagura route versus the handheld on Awasado Tenjyo Nagura route. I think that would end up making probably a more interesting video, and that way, you know, there's not sharpening and razor honing mixed together. So those will come eventually, as will the Awasado videos more towards June of this year. So anyway, I hope if you were interested in the Tenjyo Nagura, you found some of this background information interesting, and that our polishing and sharpening experiment here was useful to you, so you can make an informed choice about whether you want it in your collection or it's something that sparks your interest. There is more information on how these function and what they are and their background on naturalwhetstones.com. So if you find that you want to read about it, I always have way more information on the website than I have in these videos. And I encourage you to go check that out. And then as always, the normal YouTube stuff. If you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, etc. Until next time, thank you.